My name is Diana, and for 37 years, I prided myself on being able to read people like open books. I could spot a liar from across a crowded room, sense manipulation before it fully formed, and detect fake charm like a bloodhound detecting decay. It was a skill that had served me well as a single mother, protecting both my daughter and myself from countless predators who saw a woman alone as easy prey. But Nathan fooled me completely. I raised my daughter Lily through every storm life could throw at us. When her father abandoned us when she was barely 3 years old, I became everything: mother, father, protector, provider, cheerleader, and guardian. I worked double shifts at the hospital, sacrificed every vacation I'd ever dreamed of, wore the same clothes for years, and gave her every opportunity my exhausted hands could create. Every scraped knee, every broken heart, every triumph and failure. I was there, holding her world together with nothing but determination and unconditional love. Lily was my universe, my greatest achievement, my most precious creation. She grew into a brilliant, compassionate, beautiful woman who made every sacrifice worth it. So when my 25-year-old daughter called me with that particular breathless excitement in her voice, the kind that only comes when a woman believes she's found her soulmate, my mother's heart simultaneously soared and clenched with protective fear. "Mom," she said, her voice trembling with joy, "I've met him. I've actually met the one." I'd heard this before. There had been Marcus in college, who broke her heart by cheating with her roommate. There was James from her first job, who turned out to be married. And David, who seemed perfect until he became controlling and possessive. Each heartbreak had torn pieces from my own heart, because a mother's pain is always double. Your own hurt at seeing your child suffer, multiplied by the helpless rage of being unable to fix it. But this time felt different. There was something in Lily's voice, a confidence, a settled happiness that I'd never heard before. "I want you to meet him, Mom. His name is Nathan, and he's everything I've been looking for my entire life." I was cautious, but I was also hopeful. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe my daughter had finally found someone worthy of the extraordinary woman she'd become. Then I met Nathan, and my world tilted on its axis. He was absolutely breathtakingly, impossibly perfect. The first time he walked through my front door, he carried a bouquet of white lilies, my daughter's favorite flower, he said, and a smaller arrangement of yellow roses for me. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to honor the woman who had raised the most incredible person he'd ever met. He was devastatingly handsome in that classic, almost old-fashioned way, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at the edges and eyes the color of warm chocolate. His smile could have powered the city, and when he spoke, his voice carried this gentle authority that made you want to lean in and listen. But it wasn't his looks that captivated me. It was his manners, his thoughtfulness, his apparent devotion to my daughter. He stood when I entered the room. He pulled out chairs, opened doors, and addressed me as ma'am, until I insisted he call me Diana. After dinner, while Lily and I caught up, he quietly cleared the table and started washing dishes without being asked. When I protested, he smiled and said, "A man who doesn't help clean up after a meal his future mother-in-law cooked doesn't deserve to be at the table." Future mother-in-law. The words sent a thrill through me. He asked thoughtful questions about my work as a nurse, seemed genuinely interested in my stories, and laughed at my jokes. Not the polite chuckle most young men give older women, but real, delighted laughter that crinkled the corners of his eyes. When it came to Lily, he was everything a mother dreams of for her daughter. He listened when she spoke, really listened, with his whole attention focused on her like she was the only person in the universe. He remembered details about her day, her dreams, her fears. He celebrated her achievements and comforted her disappointments with equal intensity. I watched him look at her the way I'd always hoped someone would, like she was a miracle he couldn't quite believe he deserved. After they left that first evening, I found myself praying to a God I wasn't sure I believed in. Please let this one be real. Please let this one be worthy of her. The relationship progressed like something out of a fairy tale. Nathan integrated into our lives so seamlessly it felt like he'd always been there. He started joining us for our weekly Sunday dinners, bringing wine that perfectly complemented whatever I was cooking and stories that had us laughing until our sides ached. He remembered my birthday when my own siblings forgot. He brought me soup when I caught the flu. He fixed my leaky faucet and refused to let me pay him back. He called me Mom, with such natural affection that my heart swelled every time I heard it. Lily was transformed. She glowed with a happiness so radiant it was almost painful to witness. She talked about their future with a certainty that made me believe in love again. Their dream house, their career plans, their hopes for children. Nathan seemed equally invested, talking about their shared goals with the kind of detailed planning that suggested serious commitment. 6 months after they started dating, he asked for my blessing before proposing. He took me to lunch at a quiet cafe, nervous in a way that was both endearing and reassuring. "Diana," he said, his hands shaking slightly as he reached across the table. "I know I should have asked for your daughter's hand in marriage in the traditional sense, but I want your blessing because you raised the woman I love. Your opinion matters more to me than anyone else's." I cried. Actually cried, right there in the restaurant, because this young man understood something that so many others had missed. That my relationship with Lily wasn't something to compete with or overcome, but something to honor and join. "Of course you have my blessing," I whispered. "I can't imagine anyone more perfect for her." The proposal was everything Lily had ever dreamed of, romantic, thoughtful, and captured in photographs that would make anyone believe in soulmates. The ring was stunning but not ostentatious, clearly chosen with careful attention to her taste rather than his budget. They set a date 8 months away, and the wedding planning began immediately. Nathan was involved in every detail, excited about flowers and venues and invitation fonts in a way that made me love him even more. He wasn't one of those grooms who disappeared during planning. He was a true partner, equally invested in creating their perfect day. But it was during this blissful period that the first tiny cracks began to appear in the perfect facade. They were so small, so subtle, that I almost convinced myself I was imagining things. After all, wasn't I the one who had always been too suspicious, too protective, too ready to see threats where none existed? The first oddity was his past. In all our conversations, Nathan never talked about his childhood, his family, or his life before meeting Lily. When asked direct questions, he would deflect with charm and humor, steering the conversation elsewhere so smoothly that you almost didn't notice he hadn't answered. "Tell me about your parents," I said one Sunday over dinner. His fork paused halfway to his mouth, just for a split second, before he smiled. "Not much to tell, really. We're not close. I prefer to focus on the family I'm building now." Then he turned to Lily and asked about her week, and the moment passed. But I noticed, and I filed it away. Then there was his employment situation. Nathan claimed to be between jobs, transitioning from one career to another, taking time to figure out his next move. But his clothes were expensive, not flashy but quality. His shoes were handmade Italian leather. His watch was a Rolex that cost more than I made in 6 months. When I gently probed about his finances, concerned about how he'd support my daughter, he laughed it off. "I've been lucky with some investments," he said. "I'm careful with money. Don't worry about Lily. She'll never want for anything." The investments comment bothered me. What 28-year-old had investment income significant enough to live on while unemployed? But when I mentioned it to Lily, she brushed off my concerns. "He's just private about money, Mom. Some people are like that. And honestly, he's incredibly generous with me. I've never felt more secure in my life." The address issue was what really started my internal alarm bells ringing. Nathan had been dating Lily for 8 months, engaged for 3, but I'd never been to his place. Every date, every sleepover, every moment they spent together happened at Lily's apartment or my house. When I asked about it, he said he was in transition, staying with a friend while looking for the perfect place for him and Lily to start their new life together. One evening, I needed to mail him some wedding-related documents. "Just give me your address," I said casually. "I'll send these overnight." The reaction was immediate and startling. Nathan's entire body went rigid, his face paling as if I'd suggested something dangerous. "No," he said quickly, almost sharply. Then, catching himself, he softened his tone. I don't really give out my address. I'm staying temporarily with someone who's very private. Just give them to Lily and she can pass them along." The explanation made sense on the surface, but something about his reaction felt wrong. It was too intense, too fearful for such a simple request. I started paying closer attention after that. I noticed that Nathan never received mail, never had packages delivered, never mentioned neighbors or roommates or any of the normal details of daily life that people naturally share. He had no social media presence whatsoever. Not unusual, but combined with everything else, it felt suspicious. His phone behavior was also strange. He never left it unattended, never let the battery die, never seemed to receive calls from friends or family. The few times I saw him answer calls, he would step outside or into another room, speaking in hushed tones that suggested secrecy rather than privacy. But the moment that changed everything was a Thursday evening in November. Lily called me, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her words. Through her tears, I pieced together what had happened. She and Nathan had gotten into an argument, their first real fight, about his secretiveness. She'd finally confronted him about his past, his living situation, his reluctance to share basic information about his life. Instead of explaining or reassuring her, Nathan had exploded with anger. Not violent, but cold and cutting, saying things designed to hurt and diminish her. Then he'd stormed out, turning off his phone and disappearing completely. For 48 hours, my daughter didn't know if her fiancé was alive or dead. She called his phone continuously, straight to voicemail. She drove to the address he'd finally given her for emergencies, only to find it was a mailbox store. She contacted mutual friends, but realized she'd never actually met any of his friends. They'd only socialized with her circle. When Nathan finally returned, he offered no apology and no explanation beyond. I needed space to think. Sometimes a man needs to be alone to process things. The casual cruelty of letting someone who loved him worry for 2 days about his safety was breathtaking. But what terrified me more was how quickly Lily accepted his non-explanation. How grateful she was just to have him back. That's when I knew, with absolute certainty, that something was fundamentally wrong with Nathan. I couldn't protect Lily from ordinary heartbreak. That was part of growing up, part of learning to love. But I could protect her from danger. And every instinct I'd honed over 37 years of life was screaming that Nathan represented a threat to my daughter's safety, her future, possibly her life. So I did what any mother would do when her child was in danger. I started investigating the man who wanted to marry her. I began with the basics, the kind of internet searches that reveal the normal digital footprint every person creates simply by existing in the modern world. I searched for Nathan Williams on every social media platform, every professional networking site, every public database I could access. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. No Facebook profile, no LinkedIn account, no Twitter presence, no Instagram photos, no digital traces of friendships, employment, education, or normal human existence. In an age where everyone left some kind of online footprint, Nathan Williams existed in a complete digital void. That wasn't just unusual. It was impossible unless someone was actively working to erase their presence. Next, I tried property records, voter registrations, credit reports, anything that would confirm his basic existence as the person he claimed to be. Again, nothing. It was as if Nathan Williams had materialized out of thin air exactly when he met my daughter. The breakthrough came when I decided to reverse search his phone number. I plugged those 10 digits into every search engine and database I could find, and finally, I got a hit that made my blood turn to ice water in my veins. The number was registered to a Daniel Marcus Rodriguez. Not Nathan Williams. Daniel Rodriguez. My hands shaking. I searched for Daniel Marcus Rodriguez, and found a digital trail that painted a picture so horrifying I initially refused to believe it. Daniel Rodriguez was a convicted felon. 5 years ago, he'd been arrested for investment fraud and identity theft. Elaborate schemes where he'd created fake identities to defraud victims out of hundreds of thousands of dollars. He'd served 3 years in federal prison and been released on parole 18 months ago. Immediately after his release, Daniel Rodriguez had disappeared, and Nathan Williams had appeared. The timeline was perfect, terrifying, and undeniable. I sat in my kitchen at 2 in the morning, staring at mugshots of the man my daughter was planning to marry, and realized that every instinct that had whispered, "Something is wrong," had been trying to save her from a predator. But I couldn't take this to Lily with just internet searches and suspicions. She was so deeply in love, so invested in their future, that she'd need irrefutable proof to believe that the man she worshipped was a lie. I needed professional help. The private investigator I hired was a retired police detective named Marcus Chun who specialized in background investigations and fraud cases. I explained the situation, showed him what I'd found, and asked him to dig deeper. "Mrs. Patterson," he said after reviewing my preliminary research, "I have to tell you, this looks very concerning. If your suspicions are correct, your daughter could be in serious danger. Men like this don't just commit financial crimes. They're predators who see relationships as opportunities for exploitation." 2 weeks later, Marcus handed me a file that was worse than my worst nightmares. Daniel Rodriguez hadn't just committed financial fraud. He was a serial romantic con artist who specialized in targeting vulnerable women, building elaborate fake relationships to gain access to their resources, their connections, and their trust. The pattern was always the same. He would research potential victims, create a false identity perfectly designed to appeal to them, build an intense romantic connection based on lies and manipulation, then systematically drain them of everything valuable before disappearing. He'd done this at least 6 times that investigators could document, possibly more. The women ranged in age from 22 to 45, but they all shared certain characteristics. They were successful, financially stable, somewhat isolated, and hungry for genuine connection. One victim, Sarah Chun, had lost her entire life savings, over $200,000, to an investment scheme Daniel had convinced her to join. Another, Rebecca Martinez, had taken out loans against her home to fund his business ventures. A third, Jennifer Walsh, had introduced him to her wealthy father, who'd been defrauded out of nearly $500,000. But the most chilling case was Amanda Sullivan. Amanda had been engaged to Daniel, who'd called himself Michael Thompson when he was with her, for 8 months. She'd planned their wedding, introduced him to her family, and believed completely in their future together. Then she'd discovered his real identity and confronted him. Daniel had become violent, threatening her life and the lives of her family members. Amanda had been forced to get a restraining order, move to a different state, and change her name to escape his harassment. The private investigator had even found evidence that Daniel was currently running similar cons on at least 2 other women in nearby cities, using different identities and the same tactics he'd used on my daughter. Lily wasn't his only victim. She was just the most recent in a long line of women whose lives he'd destroyed for profit and entertainment. The most heartbreaking part of the file was the psychological profile Marcus had compiled. Daniel Rodriguez was likely a sociopath, someone incapable of genuine emotion, empathy, or love. Every tender moment he'd shared with Lily, every declaration of devotion, every promise of a future together, had been calculated manipulation designed to achieve his goals. He didn't love her. He couldn't love anyone. She was just another mark, another opportunity, another source of resources to be exploited and discarded. Reading that file, I understood that I wasn't just protecting my daughter from heartbreak. I was potentially saving her life. I called Lily and asked her to meet me for lunch alone. She was radiant with happiness, chattering about wedding flowers and honeymoon destinations, completely unaware that her world was about to collapse. I waited until we'd ordered, until she was relaxed and smiling, and then I reached across the table and placed the investigator's file in front of her. "Lily," I said, my voice steady despite the fact that my heart was breaking for her. "I need you to read this. All of it. Before you say anything, before you react, just read every page." She looked confused, then concerned as she opened the file and saw the mugshots, the criminal records, the evidence of his other victims. I watched her face change as she read. Confusion giving way to disbelief, disbelief giving way to horror, horror giving way to a kind of numb shock that scared me more than tears would have. She read every page in complete silence, her hands trembling slightly but her expression growing more composed with each revelation. When she finally closed the file and looked up at me, her voice was steady but hollow. "This is who I was going to marry," she said. "It wasn't a question." "Yes. He never loved me." "No, sweetheart. He can't love anyone. That's not how people like him work." She nodded slowly, processing the enormity of what she'd learned. "I thought I knew him. I thought he was the most honest, genuine person I'd ever met. That's what he wanted you to think. That's what makes him so dangerous. For a long moment, we sat in silence. Then Lily straightened her shoulders in a gesture that reminded me of the strong woman I'd raised her to be. We have to confront him, she said. Together. Are you sure? We could just call the police, let them handle it. No. I need to look him in the eye when he realizes I know the truth. I need to see who he really is. That evening, we sat in my living room and waited for Nathan, Daniel, to arrive for what he thought was a normal dinner with his fiancé and future mother-in-law. He walked in with his usual confident smile, carrying flowers for me and a small gift for Lily. He kissed her cheek, squeezed my hand, and asked about our days with the same charming attention he'd always shown. Watching him perform the role of loving fiancé, while knowing what he really was, made my skin crawl. Nathan, Lily said, her voice carefully controlled. We need to talk. Something in her tone must have alerted him, because his entire demeanor shifted subtly. The charming smile remained, but his eyes became watchful, calculating. Of course, beautiful. What's on your mind? Instead of answering, Lily placed the investigator's file on the coffee table between us. We know who you really are, Daniel. The transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. The mask of charm and affection didn't slip. It shattered completely, revealing something cold and predatory underneath. His face went blank, his eyes became flat and emotionless, and when he spoke, his voice carried a menace that made me reach for my phone. You don't know anything, he said quietly. You don't understand the situation you're in. We understand perfectly, I said, standing up and moving closer to Lily. We know about your criminal record, your other victims, your real name. We know you're violating your parole by using a false identity. For a moment, I thought he might try to continue the deception, might attempt to explain away the evidence or manipulate us into believing some alternative version of reality. Instead, he laughed, a sound so cold and empty it raised every hair on my arms. You stupid women, he said, his voice filled with contempt. Do you have any idea what you've just done? Do you understand the consequences of interfering with my life? He stood up, and something about his posture made every maternal instinct I possess scream in alarm. This wasn't someone preparing to leave. This was someone preparing to do violence. I hit the emergency call button on my phone, without looking away from him. You're going to regret this, he continued, taking a step toward Lily. Both of you. I don't like people who cause problems for me. 911, what's your emergency? I need police immediately, I said, my voice steady despite my terror. There's a dangerous man in my home who's threatening us. The mention of police seemed to break through Daniel's rage, reminding him that he was still on parole, still vulnerable to being sent back to prison. He looked between us with pure hatred, then grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. This isn't over, he said. You have no idea who you're dealing with. He left, but the threat lingered in the air like poison. The police arrived within minutes, took our statements, and immediately issued an APB for Daniel Rodriguez. His parole officer was contacted, a warrant was issued for his arrest for parole violation, and within 12 hours he was back in custody. During his arrest, they found evidence that he'd been planning to disappear again. Fake identification documents, large amounts of cash, and detailed notes about his next potential victims. They also found something that made my blood run cold. Surveillance photos of our homes, our workplaces, our daily routines. He'd been watching us, learning our patterns, preparing for some kind of retaliation. The detective handling the case told us that we'd likely saved not just ourselves, but his other current victims and future targets. Men like this don't stop, he explained. They escalate. If you hadn't exposed him, he would have eventually moved from financial fraud to more serious crimes. You may have prevented something much worse. Lily moved back in with me while we dealt with the legal proceedings and the emotional aftermath. She testified against him, helping to ensure he received a sentence that would keep him away from potential victims for years to come. But the real healing took much longer than the legal resolution. My daughter had to rebuild her entire sense of reality. Everything she'd believed about love, trust, and her ability to judge character had been shattered by someone who'd made exploitation an art form. She'd been intimate with a stranger, shared her deepest secrets with a predator, planned a future with someone who'd seen her as nothing more than a source of income. The guilt she felt was almost unbearable to witness. How could I have been so stupid? She would ask over and over. How could I not have seen what he was? Because he was a professional. I would tell her. This is what he did for a living. He studied women like you, learned exactly what you needed to hear, and gave you a performance so convincing that it fooled everyone who met him. But you suspected something. Only because I'm your mother, and I've spent 30 years being paranoid about people who might hurt you. Even then, I didn't know how dangerous he was until I hired a professional investigator. Slowly, with therapy and time and the support of family and real friends, Lily began to heal. She learned that being victimized by a predator didn't make her weak or stupid. It made her human. She learned that trust, while dangerous, was still worth the risk when given to the right people. Most importantly, she learned that love, real love, doesn't require you to ignore your instincts, compromise your boundaries, or accept treatment that makes you uncomfortable. The experience changed us both. Lily became more cautious but not cynical, more selective but not closed off. She eventually started dating again, but with a wisdom and strength that made me proud of the woman she'd become. As for me, I learned that a mother's intuition is worth trusting, even when it seems like paranoia. I learned that monsters don't always look monstrous. Sometimes they look like everything you've ever wanted, and that's what makes them so dangerous. I also learned that protection doesn't always mean shielding someone from pain. Sometimes it means having the courage to cause necessary pain in order to prevent devastating harm. Today, 3 years later, Lily is married to a wonderful man named James. A man whose past is an open book, whose friends have known him for decades, whose family embraces her like a daughter. Their love is built on truth, transparency, and mutual respect rather than manipulation and deception. The wedding was small, intimate, and filled with people who truly cared about their happiness. When James asked for my blessing, I was able to give it wholeheartedly, knowing that this time, I was blessing a union built on authentic love rather than calculated predation. Daniel Rodriguez is still in prison, serving a sentence that will keep him away from potential victims for many years. Sometimes I wonder about the women he didn't get to victimize because we stopped him, the families he didn't get to destroy, the lives he didn't get to ruin. I think about Amanda Sullivan, who'd found the courage to get a restraining order against him. I think about Sarah Chun and Rebecca Martinez and Jennifer Walsh, who'd survived his predation and moved on with their lives. I think about all the women who might have been his victims if we hadn't exposed him when we did. And I'm grateful, not for the pain my daughter had to endure, but for the strength she found in surviving it, and for the wisdom it gave us both. The most important lesson from this nightmare is that perfect people don't exist. When someone seems too good to be true, when they have no past, no flaws, no normal human complications, that's not a miracle. That's a red flag. Real love is messy and complicated, and built on the foundation of knowing someone's actual truth, not their performed perfection. Real love grows from seeing someone's worst qualities and choosing to stay, not from being shown only a carefully curated version of who they want you to think they are. If someone won't let you know their real self, their history, their struggles, their imperfections, they're not offering you love. They're offering you an audition for a role in their con game. Trust your instincts. Investigate inconsistencies. Protect the people you love, even when it means risking their anger or disappointment. Because sometimes, the most dangerous person in your life is the one who seems absolutely perfect and calls you mom.